Well, hello. It's Wednesday, November 18th, 2020, and this is another socially distant edition of KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly conversation on media behaviors comes to you from all over the Missouri School of Journalism. I'm in the Futures Lab studio in the lower level of the Reynolds Journalism Institute, and my colleagues Ernest Perry and Kiely are in other corners of our school. Hi, Ernest.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing okay. Kathy, good to see you too.
Good to see you, Ernest and Amy.
Okay, well, on our program this week, the rise of Parler. It's a new-ish social media platform gaining traction with Trump supporters who say more established apps, such as Facebook and Twitter, aren't safe for free speech. With everything that we've seen on the spread of COVID, there's one community where the spread is out of control and the reporting is underreported. America's jails and prisons, and an effort to keep the memory of Jamal Khashoggi alive and well ahead of next week's G20 summit. We'll talk about what's in the works and a lot more that hopefully we'll get to before our time is up today. But we're going to start by turning our attention to Fox News. Almost since its inception, it's been the air quotes conservative news network reporting the news with a slant in favor of Republican politicians and messaging. In the last few weeks, it's journalists, the folks you see on the air during the day and in the early part of the evening, have been quick to set the record on false claims from Trump and his surrogates. And once loyal viewers have taken notice.
I don't even watch Fox anymore, because they're getting just as bad as the other ones.
What's your main source of information?
My main source of information is I listen to Alex Jones.
When George Floyd, that all happened, I stopped following CNN, Fox News.
CNN, man.
Why'd you think CNN?
Because you're the worst news ever, so slanted.
Where'd you get your news from?
OANN, baby.
OANN?
They're a lot more honest than you. Even Fox News is crooked.
Even Fox?
Yep, good luck, bud. Only one good on Fox is Tucker Carlson. Maybe a little bit of Greg Gutfeld. The rest of them, slanted liberals.
Doesn't Trump like Fox? He calls it Fox.
Not anymore, probably.
He called it on election day.
Does he?
He called it on election day.
Maybe.
He did.
Maybe.
No, he did.
Oh, I don't know.
So that video was from a CNN piece interviewing Trump supporters in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And these once loyal Fox viewers are turning the dial even further to the right and finding a new home on Newsmax. And as you heard one of those people say, on OANN, they're moving away from Fox videos that are served up on YouTube too. Page views we're finding are down on sites like Breitbart and the Drudge Report. Ernest, this is a real turning point. And it seems that moment where it really happened was when Fox made the call on Arizona and continued to double down on it.
Yeah, that's when you really started to see the theory happen. And part of it was because the president pretty much called them out and said that, they were wrong and they were it was fake news and they were part of the conspiracy to cost them the election. And so you had those viewers who are rabid Trump supporters move away to these other outlets. Now those other outlets had been gaining more and more sort of prestige within that movement as the election went on. So it's not surprising that Newsmax and OANN and others, at least on the social media outlets, began to sort of take over, especially with those hardcore constituents who are supporters of Trump.
So, Kathy, Newsmax isn't really new. It started in 1998. It went online as a cable news network in 2015. How is it that in these last few weeks, these last few months, they've managed to outfox Fox?
Well, I think it's, I think what we're really seeing here is the extent to which the echo chamber is an echo chamber of our own making. We know that algorithms online can start to pigeonhole us into categories, and so we get served up news that tends to corroborate what we already believe. But a lot of that is self-imposed, and I think you heard a lot of that with the CNN piece. I think the reason for the change is that Fox News it's a news network, and it's reporting the news, and it's news that the real diehard followers of President Trump and the furthest right on the spectrum, it's news they don't want to hear. And so they've chosen not to hear it. And they're moving to these other outlets, which were more, I would say, fringe outlets, or certainly very small outlets, and they may benefit from getting part of that audience. But I think, obviously, I think all of us as citizens should be concerned when, it's really like a bunch of people putting their fingers in their ears and saying, I don't want to hear la, 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 la. And that's what we're seeing here.
So one of the things I mentioned last week as I was talking about some of the coverage of the networks calling the presidency, calling Biden president-elect, was that I noticed that Newsmax actually appears on the expanded basic MediaCom lineup here in town. Another friend of mine told me that through his AT&T programming, he's able to get access to OANN. Earnest, how do you see perhaps satellite and cable systems picking up and perhaps giving these outlets even more prominence in the coming weeks, coming months, coming years?
Well, I think that, as you said, and AT&T has it, MediaCom has it. I'm pretty sure that you could probably, if you were using Xfinity, if you were in that particular realm, that you would be able to get it there, or Comcast for that matter. These are channels, they're networks, and the cable companies will offer them if they are available without regard of whether or not they have a particular political or ideological slant, the same way in which they do with religious programming, with bilingual programming. They look at it from this perspective. I mean, but I think what we really need to talk about here is sort of what Kathy was talking about. You have people who are basically, they don't really care what the facts say. They live in their own alternative reality in which President Trump won the election, or either he won the election already, but people aren't willing to recognize it, or it was stolen from him by the establishment and others, and they're going to believe that no matter what. So as long as the president is unwilling to concede and is willing to basically come out on a daily basis and say the election was stolen from me, there's outright fraud, there's been voter tampering, as long as he's doing that, they're going to support it.
So this is the first time, Kathy, that Fox has really, in its, 2.5 decades of existence, really had competition for that loyal base. How big of a threat is it, and how do they inch back?
Well, as somebody who covers the news and likes to believe in facts, I would hope they wouldn't inch back. I would hope that they would. I'm sure what you're seeing within Fox is a real schism between people who are kind of the nighttime chat show viewers who want to hear their own received opinions recycled over and over again, and the people who are actual journalists who want there to be some semblance of reality on the air. So I think, this is kind of a day of reckoning for Fox. It's like, what are we? Are we a propaganda arm of a certain political segment, or are we a news channel? And if you're a news channel, you have to do what they're doing, which is to report the facts, whether or not some of their most loyal viewers like it or not. And, I think this is part of a maturing of a news organization. This is all about, we need to know this, and I will say it is harder today than it has ever been, because as we have talked on this program, the economics are so tough for news organizations, but you cannot pander to your readers. You have to tell people the truth. That's what we're in the business of doing, and I would hope that in the long run that pays off.
I mean, I think the other issue that Fox has right now is that, and you said this in your opening, sure, they were seen as connected to the Republican Party. What you have going on right now is the Republican Party the party, or is it Trump? And right now, Fox is, and Murdoch, I think to a certain extent, is banking on the Republican Party is not one person. And we will be able to outlast, and the party itself will be able to outlast this sort of cult of personality that is Trump. And you're seeing some of this play out in the schism that's going on. And the question, and I think what we'll be able to see is in the Georgia runoff elections, we will be able to see just how powerful Trump is, or if the Republican Party is more powerful than he is. Because if they wind up losing that election because those who support Trump don't want to connect with the party and where they're going, then we're going to know what's going on.
Okay, so this shift is happening online too. If you haven't heard of it yet, let me introduce you to Parler. It's a social media platform founded 2 years ago, which claims to be a safe haven for both free speech and personal data. Here's the company's CEO, followed by a user.
Many people feel abandoned, and so they want to go somewhere where they're not being manipulated.
You don't have to fear being censored. You don't have to fear who's looking at your profile and making judgments against you.
Kathy, I don't know about you, but I want to look that woman in the eye and say, no one is judging you on Parler because all you have done is further insulated yourself in your filter bubble by going there.
Yeah, this is obviously a reaction to some of the calling out of disinformation by some of the big social media networks, Twitter and Facebook. And again, it's as you said, it's trying to dig a little bit deeper in your own personal foxhole. And it is a dangerous phenomenon. I think that, it's fine for all these, let 1,000 flowers bloom, let people have their places to go. But I think we as educators and we as citizens have to be aware that this is not a healthy phenomenon. Our country depends on being able to talk to each other and have compromise. I mean, that is what this country was built on, compromise. The word Congress means come together. And if we can't do that, our democracy is really in a world of hurt. So we'll see where this goes. One of the interesting things to me is that a lot of the conservative leaders who are very loudly moving to Parler, and
Ted Cruz being one of them,
to move to Parler,
yeah,
they're still out there on Facebook and Twitter. So, they're going to go, political people, public personalities, TV people who rely on having a large audience, they're going to go where the audience is. They may have a profile on Parler, they may be active there, but if there's not a big audience there, they're not going to abandon these other platforms. And that's probably a healthy thing.
So there's a little bit more going on behind the scenes with Parler that's also worth talking about. Ernest, one of the primary investors is a woman by the last name of Mercer. Talk for a second about her ties to Cambridge Analytica.
Well, I mean, and we all know, I think we covered this story extensively,
right,
about Cambridge Analytica. And the problem with when you start getting into who's in control of the information, and how is that actually used, and how do you actually reach those audiences, I think that's where we start running into trouble, and that's where this particular individual sort of runs into trouble, because it's really key that you pay attention to who are the investors in Parler and the others that are coming out, because it sort of speaks a little bit to what we talk about when we talk about economics. They're doing it for economic reasons, okay? Or it could be perceived that way. They found an audience, they found a niche, and they're going to work that niche. The Cambridge Analytica and those kind of operations give them the ability to be able to really hone in and identify on those, and then they present that news and information to them in that bubble that keeps them in the bubble. And it is, as Kathy said, it is a danger to the democracy. It is a danger to I mean, you can see it right now in terms of what's happening with the election and the fact that it's been called. I mean, we all know Joe Biden will be sworn in as president on January 20th, but you still have a large segment of the population who are playing in this Parler space, who still believe that somehow, some way, Trump is going to be able to pull it out, and that's not going to happen.
Kathy, you were about to say something too.
Yeah, Rebecca Mercer is her father is a very wealthy hedge fund founder, and she and her father became very active in the prior the 2020 2012 presidential campaign and 2016. And they were big backers of Ted Cruz. So maybe the Parler Ted Cruz connection comes from there. But they are major donors of what we call dark money, meaning to organizations that would rather have the sources of funding not so obvious. And through those dark money organizations, which don't have any campaign limits, they've really bankrolled some major conservative operations. And they were the funding behind Cambridge Analytica, which of course was the data firm that got in so much trouble for stealing data from Facebook. Yeah, it's they're very active conservatives, and where they're going to take this is anybody's guess.
Okay.
Well, the question that I have about all of this are these platforms really a threat to Facebook and Twitter? Because
I'm going to go out on a limb and say no.
Yeah, I don't think they are either, because I don't think you can build a big enough base in order to be able to actually be a threat to them.
I haven't seen much about any kind of popularity or usage of Parler outside of the United States, or maybe the United States and Canada, whereas Facebook and Twitter are truly worldwide platforms, aside from perhaps VPN users in China.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, it's sort of like, if we were talking about TikTok and WeChat as opposed to Facebook and Twitter, now we can talk about a conversation as to talking about actual potential threats. But I don't see Parler and these others as being that.
And I don't see the Trump supporters as being the ones who are going to be flocking to WeChat and to TikTok these days. So every term I survey my non-journalism students and I ask them to anonymously tell me their top 3 sources of news and information. This go round, I've gotten a few people who've said Newsmax and OANN and Parler, but in much higher numbers, I've had students, especially students of color, tell me that they spend a lot of time on the Shade Room. And then they immediately group it with other gossip sites and celebrity sites and tell me that maybe it's not a legitimate source of news and information. But there's an article on our Links blog that points out the influence that the Shade Room has among registering young voters and the way that it was able to mobilize people in this election. Earnest, it may not be the powerhouse that people remember in the Black press, but it really does seem to know its audience and be mobilizing those young Black readers in a way that we may not have seen since Ebony and Jet.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is sort of an outgrowth of Black Twitter, which we all know, and they sort of use the same sort of model in trying to build this out. And what they've been able to do is to capture that sort of activism that's going on and to channel it in terms of the grassroots organizing in both voting as well as in participating in events within local communities, and then to build that out nationwide. So in a sense, they have taken some of the roots of what the Black press has been for most of its inception and pretty much created a platform within social media to do that. I think it's pretty impressive.
So I've asked this question in the past as we've talked about other sites that have kind of sort of come and go. Like they're still there, but maybe not with huge influence. I'm thinking of things like the Griot or the Root. Tell me what you think about the Shade Room. Is this the site that has figured out a way to reach a young audience where it is and to keep its attention and grow in to that next generation? Or could this be just the latest in an iteration?
I don't know, because it's so early. I think what's happened with the Griot and what happened with the Root and those is that did they have the staying power? And it goes back to economics. If they can find the funding, if they can build the funding, if they can hang on long enough to be able to sustain themselves and to reimagine and to rework and to sort of build that out, yes, it has the ability to be able to do that. But it's going to take some time, and that's been one of the things that have sort of held the others back, is being given the time and the resources to be able to become a a media operation that people will go to, for pretty much for as long as, say, Facebook or Twitter or all these others. If you can build that, then it's possible, but it's in the early stages. I'm just not sure.
So let me ask you, I know what my answer is to the students when they suddenly become ashamed that they've told me that's where they're going for news and information, that it's not legitimate. What would your answer to them be?
If you can go to a place that gives you factual news and information that you can use, that is important to you, then I don't think you should be ashamed of where you get that. Not in today's age, especially. I mean, think about it. We're talking about Parler and all these others, which are providing news and information that only fits one particular, set of facts, which really aren't true facts. You have this other that's set up that really speaks to them where they are and shows them in the ways in which they live their lives, which many of them don't see in the mainstream and they don't see in any of these other things. So I think if they can embrace that and look at it as being legitimate, and as long as those operations are presenting news and information in a factual and authentic way, then I think it has the ability to be sustainable if it can get an economic model that works.
Okay, so there's another story that's not going away anytime soon, COVID. And while it seems like a lot of outlets are focusing all their coverage on how Thanksgiving needs to be different this year to avoid super spreader events, we're turning our back on another population where the population itself doesn't have the choice to socially distance, and in some cases doesn't have the access to the PPE that we have come to take for granted. The situation has grown bleak for many incarcerated in America's jails and prisons, and those stories really aren't getting the attention that they should be given the size of that population. Kathy, why do you think that is?
Well, it's a hard population to cover. It's hard to get access to that population, but I want to say it's not impossible. I mean, I am extremely proud of the fact that it was students from the Missouri School of Journalism who were working for a project we dubbed Mo Info Corps over the summer, who really broke some of the first stories on the conditions of prisoners and in COVID in our state. So I think what the students there did was they just diligently started to do legwork, and you can do legwork remotely too, starting to look for Facebook groups, people who are families of incarcerated people, prison guards, all kinds of populations. And by working diligently, they were able to reach out and make some contacts and get some really good stories, and then actually reach out to prisoners and talk to them. And it is a terrible situation because we have over imprisoned people. I think everybody agrees with that, no matter where you are in the political spectrum. It was one of the issues that Donald Trump used to great effect in this most recent campaign. And so you have all these people in jail in a situation that's just ripe for a pandemic outbreak. And so I think this is a population that tends to be neglected. People don't want to think about people who are in jail, but that population, it's not only the people who are in jail who are being affected, it's their families, it's the prison guards, it's the people who work in those jails who are then being affected and potentially affecting their families. So this is a societal problem, and it's one of those stories that is hard to write about, hard to get people interested in it. It's a lot easier to get people interested in celebrity gossip, but it really does affect all of us.
Are there different ways, maybe, Earnest, that you know about that reporters can use technology to get inside, maybe when incarcerated individuals don't have the same access to phones or internet or video calling to do some of the remote reporting that we have been doing on other stories or covering other populations?
I mean, that's where the problem comes in. I mean, the security, the lack of access. Kathy talked about that, and just the institutional ways in which the prison industrial complex has put up barriers to keep information within the facility and away from journalists and away from the public. I think that's what makes this a very hard story to cover. I think one of the ways that we're getting the information now has a lot to do with the prison guards themselves are getting sick, and then they're taking it back to their families, and that's exposing the problems that's going on within these prisons. I mean, and it's not just the prisons; it's also the county jails. So the county jails are having the same problem there, and because they are in closer proximity to larger populations, then that exposes that problem
and there's
to
a lot
much
more
larger
transient
public.
in a
And there's a lot more
jail
transient,
as
right,
well.
in and out. I mean, so this is going to be a problem in which to cover, but I think it's something that we really need to pay more close attention to, as we have with nursing homes, because you have a similar sort of impact from COVID on both of those entities.
Okay, we're running out of time a little bit. Kathy, the G20 will be meeting next week virtually, but the host nation is Saudi Arabia. There are some freedom of speech groups that are going to be holding their own summits. Tell us quickly a little bit about those.
Well, one of the best things about COVID, if there's anything good, is that it's prevented the Saudi Crown Prince from swanning around on the world stage, which is what he had hoped to do by bringing the leaders of the major industrialized economies to Riyadh. COVID is preventing that from happening, but Saudi Arabia is still the host country, and groups like PEN America and a bunch of other press freedom groups want to make sure that people do not forget, as Saudi Arabia is bragging about itself, that this is a country whose leadership has been implicated in an almost unbelievably grisly murder of a journalist. And it's amazing how people want to forget, but it cannot be reminded enough, and whose hands you're shaking, and that there are blood on those hands. And so that's why you see there is going to be an alternative summit on Friday, a week from tomorrow. Tomorrow actually, that is going to be hosted by a number of these groups to make that reminder real.
Okay. One last thing before we go. It seems that we end up talking about this every couple of months or so. This time it happened in France after a radio station there upgraded its content management system for its website, and something like 100 obituaries prepared and held for release were published. No Queen Elizabeth, Pele, and Clint Eastwood. They're all still alive and with us. In fact, the president of Senegal probably had the best reaction to this, saying that it's not often one gets to take note of their obituary while still alive. Ernest, refresh our audience's memory. This is a totally normal thing to do, right? We have obits ready to go.
Yes, we do. It is a normal thing that newspapers do. They gather all this information. They keep it usually in a file that is ready and waiting, so that they can and they update it from time to time. And so when someone of import does pass away, they can immediately pull that out, update it, get the most up-to-date information, and then publish it. It is usually kept out of the public eye, but these things happen.
So if you're hearing this and your favorite celebrity has been reported dead, make sure that more than one source has that story. You can read more about each of the topics we talked about today on our links blog. That's under both the programs and podcast tab at kbia.org. We're also available wherever you get your podcast downloads. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, and Aaron Hay for handling the audio. Tim Pilcher composed our theme music. We'll be off next week for Thanksgiving, but we'll see you in 2 weeks with another edition of Views of the News.